Hello and welcome to episode 1 of the Mental Case podcast. Thank you so much for downloading. Really means a lot that anyone is even downloading this, following it, listening to it on Spotify or iTunes or wherever you're getting it. It really means a lot. Some of the comments and feedback I've had and the encouragement, which is really good. We're going to be talking about some serious shit, depression, anxiety, medication, therapy, all those sort of things with a various bunch of guests. Got some really good people lined up, including authors, award-winning photographers, a stand-up comedian who I will talk about in the break. So I'll be back again in about half an hour just to check we're all doing okay. And I will reveal who our guest, our third or fourth podcast guest is going to be. He's kindly agreed to do the podcast very recently, so that's really encouraging. If there's anything you want to ask any of the guests, anything you want to share about your depression, anxiety, really want to create a community on this podcast, please email thementalcasepodcast@gmail.com. And I will endeavour to answer every single one of those emails and certainly read out any stories that anyone wants to have shared on the podcast. Again, thanks for downloading. Thanks. Please like, subscribe, do all that stuff that you do, and share it with anyone who you think could do with listening to the podcast. That'd be really good. It'd be really good to build a community around this. So once again, thank you very much. I will introduce you to our first guest, who is Vikki Quartermaine, who is a CBT. She's a cognitive behavioural psychotherapist, if I can say that, and a lecturer in Australia. So she knows her stuff. She's worked across the NHS, all sorts of bits and pieces as a mental health nurse. So really good conversation with Vikki about various bits and pieces. And like I say, I'll be back in half an hour, and then at the end of the podcast say goodbye. But let's get on with it.
You are a mental case, 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 you are mental, you are a mental case, 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 you are mental. Possibly, we don't know till we talk about it.
Nope.
You might not be mental, you might be a little bit mental. We don't know till we talk about it, so let's talk about it now on the podcast. Let's talk about it now.
So we've got a sort of what I would describe as sort of my perfect podcast intro, and then I'll do one where I literally read out the thing that's gone on Facebook about you, and then I'll go straight into asking you a question.
Okay. All right.
Are you ready? By the way, I need to start leaving pauses because I tried to edit the other one the other day, Ian, and I realised that when I fuck up, then I go, and I make noises, and it's really hard to edit when there's like me. So I need to actually pause occasionally. So if I pause, it's not me being weird. It's just for edits.
Okay.
Okay. So welcome to the Mental Case podcast. Thank you for downloading the very first episode. Hopefully you've found us on Spotify and iTunes and all the rest of it. You join me in my bedroom, my new studio, I guess, with lockdown hair and lockdown face and lockdown eyes, because we're all still locked down as we record this. It is the 30th of May 2020. I'm in the UK, and we're still we're sort of semi-lockdown, I guess. And I'm going to be talking to my guest in a minute, who is way over in Australia. So it'll be interesting to find out the differences. So let's get her on. My guest is a cognitive behavioural therapist, clinical supervisor, registered mental health nurse, and associate lecturer in the only CBT Masters in Australia. She's also worked clinically in the NHS and Australia, and spent a couple of years working as a Royal Flying Doctor. So she certainly knows her stuff. But Vikki Quartermaine, what's your favourite biscuit?
Oh, do you know what? I'm plant-based these days. So it's an Oreo because we're very limited. I'm plant-based. Like, our options are very small.
You're plant-based. What does that entail?
Yeah. Vegan.
Oh, I specifically said I didn't want any vegans on the podcast. We didn't. I mean, how do I end this?
Oh, no. yeah, apparently Oreos are good. You're allowed an Oreo.
Well,
yeah, so if anybody was doing the vegan thing for health benefits, I have found every way around it.
you're like
to make that not the case.
let me find the loopholes. I want to find the loopholes. Yeah.
I have found every loophole there is.
Good.
And Oreos, my friend, like they are a good option. I'm doing well though. I'm doing well. Hair's falling out. I'm not sure at what point I should be concerned about that. But
when it all goes.
I think you have to take it a lot more seriously than I do. So I like my impression, was that I could just cut out dairy and meat and just carry on and just eat what everybody else eats. No, because that's very bad for your body. You still have to get like protein. It's a lot of extra work actually with a family.
I've got to sound saving it. Sounds like a colossal ball ache that you didn't need to add to your life, but you've made your bed. You've made your bed, and I'm going to carry on.
This is it now. I'm a little bit because I'm quite determined, and I'm quite. Once I've made my mind up, that's So you'll see me in like a few months. I'll be bold, fat, because I've found all the loopholes for veganism. Like I've worked that. You can have Oreos, you can have like Magnums. Like there is a whole.
I know. Yes. Well. So yeah. In sort of 2 or 3 years. So have you seen Vicki lately? Yeah. How's she getting on? Yeah. She's put on 20 stone and she's got alopecia.
But guess what? She's still plant-based.
But man, she got good heart health. So to give the listeners a bit of background, Vicki and her husband Steve, and at that point just Dave. Their boy. How old was Xavier when you moved over to Australia? About 2. Yeah. So me and Vicki met through friends. Yeah. So it was our next door neighbours, and then we met these guys at a party, and we thought, hey, there's a couple of cool guys. We want to be friends with these guys. How do we get friends with these guys? And we realised we had a lot of similarities, in terms of comedy and films and all the rest of it. And then
Back to the Future, mainly Back to the Future.
Mainly Back to the Future. Yeah, exactly.
Mainly Back to the Future.
It's fine. Basically, just talked about Back to the Future for ages. And then there came the awkward moment where we had to ask our original friends, our next door neighbours, if we could see you and Steve as friends without them as friends. And it wasn't like it wasn't a delineation line.
For sure. That's like asking somebody's dad to get married.
We were just like,
to do that?
We really like Vicki and Steve. If we saw them without you, are you all right? Is that all right? Because so it's fine. And then and then basically, so what happened? And I don't want to lay too much.
What did they say? I mean, they can't say no, can they? They can't. Like, what did they say?
Well, they can say no, but I'm an adult. I'm going to see whoever I goddamn want. And then so what happened is we got to know Vicki and Steve really well, and they were great. And we had some lovely, I would say 2 or 3 evenings where we had some wine and chats and all the rest of it. And then they announced they were fucking off to Australia. And I'm not laying any emotional heft at your door, but I've got to say, we were like, for fuck's sake.
I remember you said something like, I said, oh, Jack, we're going to Australia. I've got this great job with a flying doctor service. I was so happy about it. And you said something like, oh, that's just typical. I was like,
sorry.
Down well.
Sorry.
It was something that you did say. I'm not sure if it was exactly that, but that was the vibe. Of course you are.
Well, and you've almost straight into, as this is the Mental Case podcast, we're going to talk about mental health. You've almost hit upon something straight away, which is my probably core belief, and core beliefs are a big interest to me, especially talking about therapists and therapy.
Wow!
And I think I have a core belief that everything will fail. I think I have a core belief that whatever happens, everyone secretly probably hates you. I have me, not you. And it all failed.
Do you feel like you need to explain what a core belief is?
I think
I I think you should explain to
No.
me what a core belief is. Nobody's ever done that before.
Oh, really? Oh, no, because I'll get it wrong. In my understanding is it's something that's formed very early on in childhood, which basically forms the way you view the world, relationships, all the rest of it, and you almost come back to that, and it's the thing that when, say, if someone says, "Oh, I really like you," you go, "Nah, I don't think you do." If you don't think you're liked, generally, I don't think you do. And then when someone says, "Do you know what? I don't like you because you did that," you go, "Exactly. I knew you didn't like me," and it reaffirms something you hold quite. Is that right? Person who's actually educated in this area.
So I had a hairdresser appointment today. I'm going somewhere with this, and I was talking to the hairdresser about schools. And I said, one of the things that drives me insane is that people say, "Oh, well, you can just send them to any primary school and move them around and do whatever and da 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 da." You know, because it's secondary school, it's senior school as they call it over here. You know, that's the one that counts. And it's a really interesting kind of idea that, what happens whilst you're kind of, in those younger years, that doesn't really count. What really matters for schooling is like age 11 or 12 or whatever, I'm done. And that does matter. But kids are developing core beliefs when they're sort of 7, 8, 9 years old. And those beliefs, you're quite right, they're held as truths about the self, the world, or other people. And they're held as, in terms of how flexibly we can kind of move in and out of those beliefs. Without therapy, not really. They're kind of beliefs that we're kind of stuck with, and they develop in our kind of formative years. And therefore, if your kid or somebody's being bullied at school, or somebody's having a hard time, maybe their relationships with their parents aren't good or whatever, then those beliefs that are forming during those years are held on to almost like the colour of my eyes are green, or it becomes a fact about me is this. Whereas other kind of things that they encounter in the world, other ideas and beliefs, veganism, is it good, is it bad? Well, that's kind of open up to kind of debate, and we can kind of debate those things. But some of
I think we've established that veganism is a you've imposed something on yourself. You didn't need to. You're established. You're going to lose your hair. So my core belief is you've made an error, Vic.
Hey, I made an error with not taking it seriously. That's where the error was.
I stand corrected, said the man in the orthopedic shoes. So
core beliefs. So they're those kind of, they're firmly held beliefs about the self, the world, and others. So they sound like I am fundamentally stupid, or I am unlovable, or I am not good enough. And in terms of the world is dangerous, the world is unpredictable, that's what the world sounds like, and others are untrustworthy, will leave me, those sorts. That's what it sounds like when you're sort of thinking about others.
Do you know what? I always look for a clip that I can put out for the podcast, and I'm just gonna start it from you saying I'm stupid, I'm unlovable, and I'm not going to give any context. I'll go, Vicky doesn't like herself. Well, I don't know why, and it's fine. So
you can pretend to be the therapist,
yeah. So tell me about that. Tell me about your parents. Were they abusive?
Like, my hair's falling out.
So how do those core beliefs tend to manifest themselves, both in our childhood and then in adulthood, in later life?
They can manifest themselves in all different directions. So fundamentally, if you had the belief, say, I'm not good enough, that might then manifest itself in low self-esteem, poor confidence. That might be something that you'd see. If it was I'm stupid, that might fundamentally manifest itself in depression, anxiety, sort of within the workplace. If you're walking around with that belief, so there's no one answer to that. But to say that those fundamental beliefs, when we what we tend to, where we work from is we work from the presenting problem that the person comes in with. So as a therapist, we'll work with the fact that somebody's been referred to us with depression or anxiety, low self-esteem, social anxiety, health anxiety, panic disorder, whatever. And then we kind of work back from there. So then we tend to look at what are the early experiences, how do we understand this better? And that's kind of where we go. And we start to, that tends to, so opening up those conversations we're able to then kind of pull out what are those beliefs that you're still holding on to, which may have been at the time coming from school, coming from parents, coming from friendships, whatever. But where did you start to begin to believe that, let's say, you weren't good enough? Where did you start to pick up those messages? Mm-hmm. And when somebody's picked up that message, they're hypervigilant then. So information that they receive, as you said earlier, that confirms that belief is kind of, oh yeah, I knew it. Yeah, of course. Of course I can't do that because I'm stupid. I'm fundamentally da 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 da. Information that doesn't quite fit. So let's say you got some positive feedback and you fundamentally held the belief that I'm stupid. And let's say somebody came up and said, I was really, blown away with how that presentation that you did. I was really surprised at, just how much sense it made and da 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 da. Then we can either pull out the bits like, yeah, they were surprised about that because fundamentally they think I'm stupid.
Yeah.
Or we might say, well, we'll accept it a little bit in terms of what they're saying, but we'll kind of crush it to fit with our existing belief. And that might be, well, they're kind of just a nice person, or they would say that, or that's kind of, that's not really, it doesn't fit, so I can't really accept that into my belief system. So therefore, when you see people down the track, they will often say, when you talk about core beliefs, they'll often say, yeah, but I've got loads of evidence for this. I've got loads of evidence for my stupidity. And they'll be able to give you loads. And the reality is that then you have to start to talk about how is it that these pieces of information have been fed through to this belief system? And were there pieces of information that didn't fit, but were kind of turned away or accepted, but kind of conditionally accepted? And that's where you start to kind of pick it apart a little bit.
So, and does that form, I guess, the two things that, by the way, so just for the listeners, I've only had, just to give you my mental health background, because this is the first episode, obviously. So I suffer from depression, anxiety, number of things, but, and not, some would say not crippling to the point of, where I've known people have to, well, no, I have had to leave the room before because of anxiety, panic attacks, all that sort of stuff. So I've certainly, not to sound like Alan Partridge, I had a panic attack then, but I do suffer from that stuff. And how I've dealt with it is probably in my past, like poor, inadequate coping strategies in later life, I guess is the phrase that you tend to use. So whether that be alcohol or whatever, and, just trying to zone out and get out of that headspace. And then when I was about 31, I went to the doctor and sort of said all this stuff. I was in a really low place, like Jesus, I can't really see a way forward. And unfortunately, that GP said, I think you're just a bit sad. We all get sad. And let me leave that GP surgery, walking back into the centre of Worcester going, maybe it's just normal residual sadness. It doesn't feel like that, but okay. So I continued for another year and a half or whatever. And then I was about 32, just, I don't know, a couple of months into that. I went back because it was getting really bad again. Probably actually later than that. I don't know, 33, whatever. But I was prescribed fluoxetine, which street name Prozac. Yeah, you can't get it if you get it on the street from one of these guys. You got any weed? You got any fluoxetine? 20 milligrams, please. So I'm only on a low dosage. I specifically didn't want to medicate my way through it because that'd just be another It's like when they move heroin addicts onto, I can't remember what they give them.
Methadone.
Methadone, there we go.
Methadone.
Yeah, and I know Russell Brand's got a lot of opinions about what methadone is compared to heroin. It's like, it's just robbing Peter to pay Paul. So that was the first step, which I think started to, so it's an SSRA, right? So it's a
SSRI.
SSRI.
Serotonin reuptake inhibitor.
Yeah, but if I wanted your clinical
That's the nurse in me.
No, that's what I need to hear, because otherwise I'll start quoting acronyms. You'll go wrong.
No.
So it increases the serotonin levels, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this part, but serotonin levels are what makes you have ability to feel happy, right? More ability to feel happy, or that sort of thing. So that happened. Try to curtail a bit of drinking with that, but the drinking will come on to drinking, and then because a lot of stuff happened last year, my dad getting ill, whatever. I don't want this to be a big sob story. The point is, I in February started having therapy. So I never went into a therapist's room. I contacted someone at the end of February because a lot of stuff was going on for me. And then I think just about the lockdown sort of time was when I started properly, and it was all over Zoom. So it was over the way that we were recording this now. So it's all been, but you can see the other person, you can talk to them. You can literally be wearing, as I'm not now, any pants, from the waist up. But if I have to stand up for any,
no, don't.
and thank Christ, all I did this morning was put some dry shampoo in my hair. I thought, that'll do. Who cares? Because standards are slipping in lockdown. But so I started having therapy, and for 10 weeks now, you sort of unearth a lot of stuff. You get into some areas where sometimes it's hard, sometimes, but it's always good. I mean, it's always good. And the Corbally stuff has come up, and that's a long-winded way of saying that I think when we talk about these core beliefs things, I guess it can lead to like avoidance of any sort of compliments and stuff like that, if it's that sort of area, and also like confirmation bias. I guess you were talking about confirmation bias, but it's like that's the thing. So I'll just
I try to avoid the jargon, but you're going right in there. You're
no
with the confirmation bias. Excuse me.
No, and it's the jargon helps me to explain it to people because otherwise I get too emotional about it. The reason sometimes I come back to the jargon.
So you're avoiding. You're avoiding again. I hope your therapist is listening to this. That's what he does. If he starts your jargon, that's exactly where he's going.
apparently I form attachments too easily as well. And I'm like, thanks a lot. Which is probably why I like you and Steve. It was just like, I like you. And you're like, we've only just said hello, but I like you. Do you love me? Hey, welcome back. You've made it to the middle of the podcast, which means you either have skipped to this bit, or you've fallen asleep and woken up to the sound of my voice, or you genuinely are enjoying the conversation with between me and Vicky. So thank you for sticking with it this far. I meant to mention at the start of this, if there are any sponsors that would like to sponsor the podcast, please get in touch, because obviously I want to be able to make as much content and interview as many people as I can and get more stuff out there, more resource. So if you want to get in touch, please do email me, thementalcasepodcast@gmail.com. So I mentioned at the start some exciting news. I have had confirmation, officially confirmed, that on probably the third or fourth show, recording it tomorrow, I will be speaking with none other than UK stand-up comedian and previously known as Hugo Boss, Mr. Joe Lycett. Yes, Joe has agreed to do the podcast, which is really good. I used to know him way back when we worked on Hospital Radio together. So I pulled a few strings, and it's really amazing to me that he even wants to give up an hour of his time to record the podcast and talk about mental health and all this sort of stuff. So do tune in for that one. That should be a really good show. He's stratospheric at the minute. I remember he told me he was going to do stand-up about 15 years ago, and I sort of thought, well, good luck, hopefully it goes really well, and I think he's doing all right. So that should be a really good show. So anyway, please enjoy the last part of the podcast, and I will be back at the end to say goodbye. But for now, goodbye. Podcasts and stuff. The reason I'm doing this podcast, and I'm not avoiding in a way, is because I'm trying to get this podcast is all about. So loads of podcasts I listen to have got me through loads of stuff, and they're not necessarily advertised as mental health podcasts. You'd only know if you really listen to them. But like, particularly two guys I love, Ellis James and John Robbins, they've been on radio for like 5-6 years, both stand-ups, and both just, you know, about, well, they're now like 38 and 39, but when I was listening to them, they were right in the middle point of the key suicide age, as we like to call it in the UK, for men. But, you know, the sort of the 30-year-old man who goes, I don't know how to deal with this, I can't talk about it. And they really talked about it openly, and they've raised loads of money for it, but they do it with such humour, and it's like, right, okay, I just want to add to resources for people to listen to it and genuinely ask questions. And you know, I mean, obviously, hopefully as more people start to listen and build a community around it, then you can, you know, email in and the mental case podcast at gmail.com and ask questions of guests, and also share your stories and just like get it out there, because the minute you open up to people, it's like, whoa. I said on a podcast yesterday or 2 days ago when I was recording with someone who's going to go out soon, I said, look, you know, we've just spoken about mental health for 2 hours, but I haven't thought about mental health, if that makes any sense. I wasn't in my head. I was talking about it, and that's a completely different place. I wasn't thinking about my mental health. It's cathartic.
That's one of the things with therapy, when people say, you know, one of the things people say to therapists, like, oh, you poor thing, you know, having to listen to all that, you know, and you do kind of go, you know, a couple of things. I sort of think, number one, it happened to me the other day, actually. I was doing some assessments. I was assessing students, and I work with actors, and the actors have to be a good representation. So this is my lecturing job. So they have to give a good representation of mental health conditions and to the students, and the students have to do the assessment, and then I'll pass them or fail them. I'll pass them or give them another go. That's.
I was just going to say it's a semantic difference, right? You failed.
Well, there's, you know, there has to be, you know, I think there's a huge responsibility that if people are going out into the world working with people in a room on a one-to-one basis, you have to make sure that that person's able to do it. Because I think that's a huge responsibility. I certainly feel with students that the potential to do harm in therapy, I think, is a real one. Yep. And I think if you do it badly, so I will send people back for another try. But I was chatting to these actors, and you know, in their downtime, you know, they were doing the whole. I just think, you know, therapists are just, you know, must be such a hard job. And I used to get it when, you know, when I was working, I'm still registered as a nurse, but when I was working as a mental health nurse, you know, you do, you know, it must be so hard to be. And do you know what? The few things I would say to that are, I think we get credit where it's not due, because I think most of the time you sort of feel like when somebody comes to you, you sort of feel like straight away they're bringing something that's tangible to work with. And it's almost like you've got the key and they've got the lock, and they're just kind of showing you where the lock is, and you're in your head kind of going, right, I've got the right keys for that. I mean, in many ways it's a really positive experience. Yeah. And it's a so I sort of think that sometimes, you know, the whole poor you, it's like that. I'm not sure people really have a really good concept of, you know, what it feels like when you see somebody in pain, to think I might be able to just help a little bit with that, and that's a really good feeling.
Even as someone who doesn't, obviously not registered at all to do any sort of therapy, I feel that when I can talk to people, you know, like, so if someone even slightly hints at how they're doing, I have said quite consistently, I would say this has dialed up massively in the last 2 years, so a year and a half maybe, you know, when I say, if I can hear they're really low, I'm like, talk to me about it. Honestly, just tell me, talk to me about anything. And my thing that I try and get them to open up is, believe me when I say, I know what you're talking about, like the lowest points. I really know how it can feel to feel like the worst you've ever felt. And they go, okay. And then because you're like opening up, you're opening up a space which is like, this is safe. I'm not going to judge you and go, what? You've got nothing to be sad about. You've got 40K a year. Get over it. And I think all those people are, I said it in the intro that went out a couple of days ago, but we've all got mental health because we've all got a brain, right? You can't not have mental health. It doesn't matter if it's issues I get. And even like the terminology, it's trying to shy away from terminology and just go, look, just talk about it. And you're right. The terminology it can be too medical or almost put people off because it's not colloquial, it's not chatty. And really, it's like, are you feeling shit? Why are you feeling shit? What's going on for you? What's happened?
I think also, Jack, with your podcast, I think this, the fact that, as I'm sat here, right, I'm thinking to myself, as a lecturer and a psychotherapist and I'm sat here thinking, I'd love another glass of wine. I really, I've got my bottle here. I'm thinking, and there is a part, there's a part that kind of goes, yes, but be the professional, and I think sometimes that gets in the way. This is my introduction to getting myself another glass of wine, by the way. This is the lead up to this. But no, I do genuinely think, and I think, I think sometimes when people come to see therapists, they have this image of this kind of sanitized person with this sanitized brain, with this kind of particular approach, which I don't know. I remember one woman saying to me, I just imagined like half, I think it was half-rim glasses and tweed. Yeah. And I just remember, she said, I just remembered it, just had that, but you're not like, you don't look like that. You don't look like that at all. And I think for a lot of people, that whole kind of the impression of what that is and what that should be. And I think also with a lot of therapists now, I think the more we can convey, one of the things I teach students first is it's not us and them, it's just us. It's just us, when we can start moving away from, this patient or this service user, whatever term you want to use, this, I don't know, whatever terms there are. But we need to start moving away from that. We need to just start talking about us. And that's how I talk in lectures. I will talk about when we experience when we experience this, we have core beliefs and our core beliefs will. And because just as we're sort of saying, everybody has mental health, everybody has core beliefs. Some of them will be helpful, some of them will be positive, some of them will nudge them in sort of helpful ways in their life, and some of them will be a bit problematic. But we don't get to escape having fundamental beliefs about ourselves and the world and others. No. So to speak as a lecturer and say, when your patients have I cut that language completely. When we have,
yes,
I think that.
I love that. I love the fact that it's acknowledgement that everyone. It's not even what I hate that whether they choose to admit it. The thing is, this is what happens. Like whenever you start talking about it, you sort of get. Then you go, oh, I don't mean this, and caveat. I'm like, I'm going to stop caveating. Like you can get yourself caught in it. Oh, she's reaching for the wine.
Right, judge all you like, people.
How's while we're on that subject, how's the drinking going at the minute? I've asked everyone that, by the way.
In terms of increase, decrease, or what curbs my drinking significantly is having 2 children. Because by the time I've got them sorted, by the time I've got them into bed, by the time I've finished cleaning up after tea and I've done all the stuff that you have to do, literally one glass of wine puts me out. Like, I so I think the fact that I have children actually is both good and bad for my alcohol consumption.
Yeah.
Because it's just so, I'm just so tired. I'm just so tired. One glass of red wine or half a glass of red wine, and I'm gone.
I'm concerned for the podcast now because we've still got another hour, and if you fall asleep mid sentence, I'm gonna have to.
When we were deciding who goes, like, is this going to be early your time, late my time, or vice versa? One of the things I did mention was actually my brain stops working in the evening, and yet here we are.
Here we are. So yeah, the time difference is like what? 12? Is it 10 hours? 12 hours? Something like that?
It's 7:20 here, so.
All right. Yeah, so it's 5 to 11 in the morning as I record this. And yes, I've got a beer. Don't judge me.
Yeah.
It's fine. I'm not doing this all the time, but I guess I know a lot of people's alcohol consumption is dialed up during this. I mean, obviously people aren't going to the pubs, but Jesus, I mean, the thing is, yeah, that's the thing. It's unrepresentative because if you're not going to the pubs, people are staying home and drinking. Having said that, I hear the green bins being emptied, the recycling bins here and this road, and it's like the Weatherspoons bin being emptied.
Yeah.
A lot, and everyone, not everyone, and it's a sweeping statement, but a lot of people I speak to are like, yeah, I'm having a few drinks. I mean, like, okay, cool. But it's like, and then they're trying to draw a line where they go, it's 5 p.m. I'll start from 5 p.m. and stuff, and it's not, and even with drinking, I talk about drinking as an adequate coping mechanism. I've never been, as Frank Skinner refers to, because he talks about his drinking. I never woke up and reached for the Pernod or a bottle of vodka. I've never been that. I just look forward to the evening drink and then get into the white heat of drinking where I'm like, oh, it's happy, and 3-4 pints, and you're like, I'm gonna keep going. So and that's where like it gets yeah, good. Hey, are you getting another drink now? Is that what you're having?
Do you know what I actually thought about doing? I thought it's not going to look good if I keep topping up my wine glass. Maybe I should just line up some wine glasses.
Right.
My teeth will go like really purple, and people will be like, "She's only had that."
This is what I do. This is what I do on Zoom calls because I do a bit of stuff on Twitch as well. So I finish this glass, right? And I do this, like, yeah, that's really good. And then subtly, while people are talking, I'm pouring a drink here, and then before they know it, I'm like, yeah, the thing is, it's and a new drink enters the screen. They think, well, hang on, you didn't leave, so I've just line up a few bits. It's fine.
See, I did honestly think, right, I thought, and this comes back to the whole kind of stuffiness around mental health and how there was a temptation for me to go, oh, don't be seen pouring alcohol and talking about mental health. So even me, like trying to destigmatize, and I'm like, oh, be the perfect therapist.
Yeah.
And so I must admit, as a therapist, you're in a meta space because you're commenting on the things that you'd be you're commenting on the things that you'd be commenting on. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So in your own brain, you're going, I shouldn't do that. Well, a therapist wouldn't say I shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it's meta.
And also, if you know about all this stuff, it's like, I always think about this about doctors, so if you know your field and you get a little pain in, or she's topping up the alcohol, if you've got because a lot of people will be listening to the podcast rather than watching the audio. So I need to tell them every time that do
something odd.
Need another drink. Need it. She needs a drink just to get through this conversation. And yeah, so doctors, when they feel a pain, they go, oh, it's probably that. Oh God, I know too much. Like, so mental health, this interests me from a therapist point of view. So mental health for you, if you've ever suffered mental health issues, I presume, well, everyone has to a certain extent, but you must recognize them in yourself and go, oh, more so because you're hyper vigilant, I guess, are you?
I think I do think, and I've talked to other therapists. I'm kind of glad you brought that up actually, because a couple of things. Being a therapist isn't having therapy. And I think sometimes therapists give themselves a really hard time about the fact that they're struggling, because I'm a therapist and therefore I've got this, you know, extra information, and therefore I should be utilising this extra information. And then you suddenly recognise that you brought in a should, like, and that's problematic. And so, but I do think, I do think that there is definitely that. I remember doing my training as a cognitive behavioural therapist about 10 years ago. And you kind of start simple with something called a maintenance cycle. So before you get to beliefs and compensatory behaviours and rules and all of that stuff, and you start really simple with what are cognitions for their thoughts. Thoughts lead to feelings. So at its most basic, feelings will impact your behaviour. And there may well be some physiological responses that go along with that. And just beginning to understand the idea that cognitive processes, just because I have a thought doesn't make it accurate, true, helpful. It's simply a perspective that I'm having at that moment, at that time, and on a different day. Not even for a different person, but on a different day, at a different time, in a different circumstance, I might have come to a different conclusion. I might have given that same thing different meaning. And I remember being mind blown, just going, what? How is that? How can that be? Because we're all kind of aware, oh yeah, I sort of think that, but then I also think that. And we have that slight kind of, yeah, I recognise there could be a couple of perspectives, but I guess just really starting to think about cognitive processes, and when you kind of learn that actually that's kind of being dictated, like our strings are being pulled by these kind of beliefs and these compensatory behaviours, and then all of a sudden you're kind of going, what? Like, and you're faced with this whole, I found it quite a raw experience. I spent a lot of time training crying. I just remember, and quite a lot of us did. I lost my dad in the process of that, so that was kind of, you know, during my training. So that probably didn't help. But no. I remember just suddenly becoming aware, and I wasn't having therapy, so there was no kind of supportive circle time around that. It was kind of, you suddenly faced with your own core beliefs, your own cognitions, your own compensatory behaviours, your own behavioural responses, and it suddenly felt like that, you know, you're not having therapy, so this isn't going to be stuff that you're going to take anywhere. This is stuff that you're learning, but you can't actually take anywhere. And, you know, as a lecturer now myself, I spend more time caring about that, that for the people, for the students that come in. Because when you're confronted with all of this stuff and with nowhere really to take it, you know, you're just on to the next lecture and the next assignment and the next whatever. I said, well, I've just discovered that, you know, here I am being filmed giving an assessment session or whatever, and then I'm going to critique it and the class are going to critique it. And underlying that, I've got this feeling not being good enough. And
so do you have therapy then?
Do I have therapy? No, I don't have therapy. Do I think everybody needs therapy? Yeah. I have taken medication before. When I had my, actually when I had my boy and my little girl, I had postnatal depression. But when I had my son, I think that was probably the weirdest time actually. I guess I thought, this is understandable though. anybody in my situation with a little baby who's keeping them up all night, who's you know, suddenly I can't see my friends, suddenly I can't, you know, go to gigs, and suddenly going to the cinema, like, it is problematic unless I go to like a mums and bubs session and listen to other people's kids crying. Like, suddenly all this stuff has got difficult. So anybody in my situation would feel the same.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that was kind of a level of denial or, I struggled like crazy. And you know, here I was, a CBT therapist and a mental health nurse, and you know, I should, which is one of the, you know, your human mention, like we do shoulds and musts, and they're not helpful. But the sense was that, you know, if I can't master this, then I'm not only not good as a mum, but I'm not good as a therapist or a nurse. Like, everything about me is not good.
I'm a fraud.
And that was,
You're a goddamn fraud.
I'm a goddamn fraud.
No, it's right though. You're not practicing what you preach, and that happens in loads of jobs. People,
and I think the reality was with postnatal depression is I thought, but I don't, like, I know behavioural activation is helpful. So I know that doing more stuff for enjoyment and achievement and closeness is going to be helpful. But in this new context, I don't know how to make that work. I don't know how, I haven't got the roadmap anymore about, like, I know what makes me happy, going to gigs. Like, oh, I know what makes me happy, going to see my friends. Oh, yeah, my friends, yeah, that's difficult. And I suddenly lost the roadmap somehow. And I think losing the roadmap. But what was really interesting, I learned so much during those 2 phases of my life. The things that really struck me were how much I put down you know, Steve and I were arguing so much, just arguing, you know, and the thoughts and the feelings feel real, and it feels so real that anybody would face this, anybody would be angry at him for this, anybody would be annoyed about that, and I think that's the thing that kind of and if somebody said I don't know anything about perspectives or whatever, I probably couldn't. I've just really struggled to kind of buy into that. And so I can see why people are prevented from accessing treatment. You know, and particularly when you start talking about perspectives and when you're in it, it doesn't, I don't know about other people, I can't speak for other people, but I do, from my own perspective, I definitely got why people don't come forward sooner, because it feels like, no, things are really bad, things are really crappy, things are difficult and painful, and you know, and it's not my perspective, it is how it is, this is how it is. I mean, and I struggled for a really long time, and the health visitor didn't give me, because she knew what I did and she knew what I did for a living, and she probably didn't want to patronize me or whatever, she didn't ask me any mental health questions. And it wasn't until I went to see a student health visitor who was like, oh, I'm really sorry, but you know, this is part of my job and I've got to ask you some questions about your mental health, and I've got to ask you And they did the Edinburgh scale, which is like a postnatal depression scoring system. And I remember just reading my way through it and just crying, and I was like, and by that point I'd kind of come through the worst, I think, but I suddenly recognized when somebody was in that kind of formal space and I was having to confront how I thought and felt about, you know, all these different elements. It's a kind of scoring, it's a therapeutic measure, so it's like a questionnaire. And then I was having to sort of confront the fact that actually I've been depressed. And, you know, and then when I had my daughter and we moved from Broken Hill to Adelaide, I had no supports, no social, you know, no family, no social contacts. Again, that kind of all of those kind of structures kind of whipped away, but determined this time. Like, it's not going to get me this time because I am going to beat it. I'm going to, I know what that feels like, and I will do all these things. And I did, I became a surf lifesaver, and I did, like, I will find my way through I'm still a surf lifesaver now, but I will do so many activities that, I will show, and I was just exhausted, just, just with a baby, and Steve got a job working away, and I actually ended up taking medication, fluoxetine. And when people talk about medication and therapy, and I think a lot of people feel like they have to come down on the side. Are you going to go the talking route, or are you going to go the medication route? Which way are you going to go? I mean, as a nurse and a psychotherapist, I've got a hand in sort of two camps there. But I think the thing that when I got to the point where I needed medication, there was no possible. I couldn't get out of bed at one point. I was just not able to. I couldn't function.
Yeah.
And I started taking fluoxetine, 20 milligrams. The medication that I've seen people encourage people to take over the years, whatever. And for me, taking medication turned things around, and this is somebody with all of the kind of therapy and the therapeutic knowledge and the blueprints and the it's important to say I wasn't having therapy. But how I present that to a lot of people, both in therapy and when I'm lecturing, is that medication's really good for symptoms, really good. People might have to try some different medications to find something that really works. But in terms of causes, in terms of looking at what is it that kind of keeps bringing this stuff back, then that's where therapy comes in.
Hello, just a last word from me. Thank you for making it all the way through to this part of the podcast. Obviously, and really thanks to Vicki for opening up about her history of postnatal depression and therapy and talking to us about that sort of stuff. That's really good. We're heading into the last part now, so I don't think you'll hear from me again. I think we'll be done, but you will hear from me next week, so download the podcast, etc, etc, etc. I just wanted to give a shout out to another podcast which has just been released. It's a new podcast called the As Yet Unnamed Podcast, and it's by a good friend of mine, Ian Barstow. His first guest is none other than Joe Lycett. So it's a brilliant interview. It's really good, and his production values are way better than mine, considering all this has been done over Zoom and all the rest of it. But yeah, please do download his podcast. Go to the As Yet Unnamed Podcast on Spotify and iTunes, and give him a little bit of give him a little like, give him a nice review, because he doesn't deserve it, but I don't want to be nice to him. I don't want to commit that to the record, but he's pretty good human being, and there's some good interviews, so download it. Anyway, I will see you next week for the next podcast. Enjoy the last 10-15 minutes, and goodbye.
Before you get comfortable, right, you have to put on that yellow jacket.
Sorry, you want what? Say that again.
Before you get comfortable, you have to put on that yellow jacket.
Fucking hell, hang on. So for the listeners, in the background, if you're watching this on YouTube, obviously I have my my Tintin print, which I bought when I was pissed, which I've never hung. This guy went, "I've got a Tintin print." I said, "What do you want for it?" He went, 10 quid. I was like, "I got 10 quid, yeah."
Hey, that's worth 10 quid. That's a big print.
It's a beaut. Captain Haddock down there, and then there's a little Deathly Hallows print up here, because I like Harry Potter, and Olive's really into Harry Potter, my 3-year-old. Right, I'll get the fake Freddie Mercury jacket. Hang on.
I mean, that is that is a look.
you go.
I think we should keep it on there.
What,
What's it made of?
it's made of some sort of vinyl shitty.
Is it like a? It's not leather. I mean,
no, it's like
God forbid you spend like 500 quid on. That's commitment if you do.
It's probably so. There is a guy, that John Robbins I mentioned earlier. He loves Queen, and he always talks about Queen. And he bought one for like. They said, "How much was that jacket, John?" And he bought one. He was like, "North of 200." And they went, "Okay." Like, he didn't want to go. Once you're north of 200, you're like, "Well, you're probably talking more or less 300." You just don't want to say, which is fine.
No.
Yeah.
That is a look, isn't it?
It's a look.
Was it a fancy dress purchase, or was it like down the market?
No, it was a fancy dress purchase. We were at a party, and it was one of our friends, and they did. The theme was like music and food puns. So you had to come as a music and food pun, and I went as Freddie Mercury.
Was it Freddie on the top half and?
No.
Freddie on the bottom.
There was a bit of.
How did you make that all work?
I think there's a bit of bread products, various bread products, sellotape to me, croutons, etc., etc. But then on the end of the mic stand was I'd crafted, instead of the microphone, it was a mini baguette which represented the microphone, and I made sure I walked in and sort of did the Freddie, the strutting, just and then was confronted with the party that had already been filled full of people, and they said, "Right, you've got to guess who everyone is." I was like, Jesus. And some of them were quite obvious. Wow, I can't remember any of the puns. It's a long time ago now, but I've dressed as Freddie Mercury a couple of times. I also went as Freddie Mercury for Halloween when I worked for a recruitment company, but it was Halloween, so I went as Deddy Mercury, and I was a zombie Freddie Mercury. Yeah.
Hopefully you left a little bit of time.
Well, there's been time.
I mean, a respectful amount of time between Deddy Mercury and.
It was just after the announcement. Yeah, I was working for a recruitment company in 1993 when I was 5 years old.
Yes. I forget, you're quite young, aren't you?
No, I'm 34 years old. Am I allowed to ask your age, Vicky?
You can if you want. I won't. Look, I've talked to you about postnatal depression. I've talked to you about core beliefs. You're not satisfied, are you? There's always something else.
I am. Can I? Let me come back to.
You can ask my age if you want to.
No, I don't want to. Thanks.
No, I don't even know anymore because I've got 2 kids and my brain's scrambled quite a bit.
It's not important. So let me ask you not a question, actually. Let me remind you of something. So when we went to your house where you lived on like a reserve thing, nature reserve, which is really nice, idyllic. And I remember you told a story about CBT that night. Can you hear that dog barking, by the way? This is the trouble with recording a podcast in a street in the middle of Worcester with no. Jesus Christ! I'm leaving it in.
I reckon you should shout out the window.
Shut the fucking dog up!
Yes.
As I just fire a few rounds. You told a story about a woman. I think it was a patient of yours.
No! Please, no patient.
No. I think it was
nothing identifiable.
No,
I don't know if it said anything identifiable to you. No,
you didn't. You were talking about. I was talking about. I think how people get. I don't get this, but how people get worried. Like my parents are very much this. We're in a restaurant. We walk into a restaurant. Everyone's going to look. Oh God, they're all looking at us. Everyone. And they get all antsy. And you told the story about when you took someone to a bar. I'm probably misremembering this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but basically you ordered 2 drinks and you're like, I think you just pushed one of the drinks off the table, like off the bar, and it smashed, and everyone, maybe they looked up for a second because there was an initial smash, but they just went back to eating. And you were like, look, no one cares, basically. And I've kept that in my head for ages. No one really gives a shit about you. Yeah. What you're doing. They care about themselves more than anything else. Is that right? Is that the story?
Yeah. So one of the things that you do, when I was thinking about identifiable, one of the things that obviously nobody, no therapist in their right mind would ever kind of disclose names or you know, any details, but sometimes people can say something that's just distinctive enough that people might cotton on, and that so for instance, if they talk about somebody who has a very specific phobia, and if you say that publicly, like, oh, this person who has this really weird phobia of, I don't know, bread rolls, then it's not identifiable within the person to the person that you're talking to. You know, it's kind of, it's far enough removed that, oh, that was a case in like Birmingham, whatever. But sometimes what can be identifiable is the fact that that thing is so unique that even if they were in Birmingham or wherever they were, somebody's going, hang on a minute, I know somebody who's there.
Yeah.
So when people say, you told me that story, I was like, oh.
My patient, I can't name him, had a fear of being sacked because he was, let's just say he was an advisor to, let's just say, the Prime Minister of the UK, and he went on a round trip, and let's just say that sort of thing. When
he had eyesight issues.
Well,
he had eyesight.
Yeah. You know, because Boris Johnson he's washed his hands. He's encouraging us to wash his hands, and he's washed his hands of that entire situation. I've washed my hands of it. Fucking knob. Right, not getting political. Jesus.
I'll be honest with you. I mean, that's something else, isn't it? That's like,
I have to eat onion rings now.
That you just moaned at me for like kicking my chair or something, like just to kind of ease the burden of stress on my back, and like you're eating onion rings with a scrunchy bag.
I'm the host, mate.
This is empowering.
I'm the host. Well, I've got a Freddie Mercury jacket on.
One of the things that we do in CBT is very often we test out some of these beliefs, or we test out some in terms of, if people hold a belief, they'll have compensatory behaviour. But let's say we've got a situation where somebody believes that they're not likable, incompetent, not lovable, whatever. Let's say there's their beliefs, and they've got to the compensatory behaviours become, you know, do everything that you can to try to show that you're not incompetent, you're not stupid, that you're doing everything right. And then let's say this person that it manifests in social anxiety. When you asked me earlier about how does it manifest, well, those kind of beliefs could manifest in any different direction. So let's say it manifested in social anxiety, where people, let's say that person became very self-conscious in social situations about making a mistake because that would mean that they're incompetent, etc., etc. And other people were judgmental and quite nasty. So they don't want to activate those beliefs. So in doing that, they might go into a bar and have a series of predictions about what might happen within that situation. So what if I drop my drink? What if I ask for something incorrectly? What if I say something stupid? What if I da-da-da? So we're talking sort of social anxiety here. So one of the things that you might test out using CBT would be, let's have a look at that. Let's write down those predictions about what might happen, let's say, if you dropped a drink. So you'd write out a list of predictions, take some belief ratings, so that everybody would laugh, the music would stop, people would turn around. And these beliefs, you know, they sound kind of humorous, but actually in that person's mind, like, this is all real. This could potentially be the social catastrophe of the century. You know, this is going to be horrific.
Woman drops drink in Wetherspoons. Music stops. People are outraged.
You can almost, you know, and these predictions, you know, people kind of go, yeah, I know on one level, like there's a part of me that's kind of going, yeah, but that wouldn't happen. But there's another part in a felt sense that thinks actually maybe it would happen. Maybe that is something that would happen. And I just couldn't deal with that. And so I'd rather just not go, because that I'd rather avoid. I'd rather do the short-term relief. I'd rather just not do that. So one of the things you might set up is a behavioural experiment where you write a whole series of predictions and you actually go out and test it. Let's see what happens when a drink crashes on the floor. And as a CBT therapist, one of the things you might do first is say, I want you to observe me. So I'll do it, and you observe what happens when I do it. Actually, what you'd be building to, the ideal would be that they would do it. So if you can get it to that point, then that's ideal.
Yeah.
But actually, if somebody says fundamentally that's never going to happen, then as a CBT therapist, you might go, or a cognitive behaviour therapist, you might go and make that happen. And essentially, that's a sort of behavioural experiment. So I vomited outside Selfridges in the Bullring in Birmingham, which was just vomiting up McDonald's milkshake, just to show somebody what would happen.
Sorry, you actually did.
I did it, yeah, and my patient watched from afar, just to see what would happen, because she read the whole series. She had a vomit phobia, but it was around the social catastrophe of vomiting.
Mate, I'm just gotta say, Vic, that's going above and beyond for the cause.
No, well, not really. I mean, I think the greatest CBT therapists, not that I'm putting myself up there, but they are the ones who will go out there, get their hands dirty, drop the drinks, be sick in a public place, I've done so many behavioural experiments. I mean, that's truly what CBT should all be about, is about actually getting out there with the person and actually testing out some of that stuff.
See, I've got one of those things. I feel like if I had a shit in the middle of the Bullring, that everyone would look at me. So could you show me? Could you show me that won't happen?
Do you know, could you imagine if they were all just like having a laugh at my expense, going, yeah, you're really good. She'll be filmed for sort of like, what can we get her to do?
Have you, Vicki Quartermaine do anything, mate? Yeah. I've got a fear of slapping. Whoopsie! Don't know what it is. All right, I'll slap him. I'll slap the guy.
Is he still alive?
He's dead, mate. I shouldn't have picked.
Whoopsie!
I feel like that was a bad choice.
I've just picked.
That's an edit there, there.
No, the edits will play into my fear. I ain't doing it. No, wait. How is your mental health right now?
Good. Really good. She says, holding a big glass of wine. Really, really good. Yeah, good. Weirdly, this situation, I've mentioned about my husband's job and whatever, and I think it's forced to move. So I'm no longer single parent on my own 3 days a week by myself, kind of managing kids, trying to work, trying to do everything. Getting through traffic, 45 minutes to work, 45 minutes home, just, kids in like after school clubs, picking them up, an hour with them and whatever. It's forced the change. And so we've moved to this renovation, which is kind of on the edge of the outback. And I still work remotely as a lecturer. Steve's still working at the moment. But the change has been the fact that we're back together as a family. Even though our little boy's been homeschooled and there's quite a lot of pressure on us both kind of working whilst trying to homeschool, and we've got a 3-year-old and no support around us, but at least we're kind of together, and that's helpful. I didn't realize how much I needed to slow down, and I was only saying to a friend of mine, earlier today, just the fact that it takes me half an hour to light a fire means I don't have a choice but to slow down. You know, it's an open fire, the house needs, you know, it's cold, and it takes me half an hour to get the kindling, you know, get the paper, get the logs, build it up, you know, put some fire in. So everything has to be done at this kind of pace, which is so much slower, and as a result of that, and also kind of the things to do here fairly limited in terms of, you know, it's kind of antique shops and coffee shops and walks by the river and stuff like that. And I hadn't realised just how much I needed this enforced downtime. Like, it is enforced downtime because I'm normally so busy. I'm just racing and racing and racing, and then I'm finding things to do as well. Like, I should be like, oh, I'll go to the cinema, I'll go to a gig, I'll go to the, you know, I'll go and do all this other stuff, you know, and actually just having that time and space has really been great, actually. So yeah, so you know, in terms of my own mental health, pretty good at the moment. But it's always at the moment, because we're all on a continuum all the time. We're all kind of bouncing up and down this continuum of good mental health, bad mental health. And this is how I sort of put it over to people, is kind of, you know, once we accept, and this is to students as well, once we accept that we're all on the continuum, you know, it kind of stops the us and them, it stops the kind of stigmatization, because you kind of go like, so, and I talk to students and patients the same, you know, I'd say, like, you know, it's kind of, let's say this is really, really good at this end, really, really bad down this end. You know, I might start up here in the morning, and by lunchtime I might be down here, and I might pop back up when, you know, I see my little girl and we have some time together, and I might, but when we spend too much time down the other end and we're not really making it into the other side very often, or when we are, it's kind of fleeting, it's not as enjoyable as it. That's not to say we don't enter into the really good side. That's the other thing. People who are depressed or don't stay there, they, you know, they can have a good night out, you know. So when people say, oh yeah, but I thought they were having a great time, yeah, they're good, you know, for that time they were having a great time. That doesn't mean they're not depressed. So we're all on that continuum. But I often say to people, it's kind of when we spend a little bit too much time down the other end, and we're not kind of making it over to the other side as much as we want to. We're not, you know, or as much as we'd expect to, or as much as we ideally would be spending at that sort of, you know, other end. I think that's where I think that's the continuum is probably the best way to think of it for all of us. That and that, you know, if they're down there for too long, then sometimes that's where kind of things like therapy and medication might be useful. But we're all on the continuum. Like nobody's escaped the continuum. You're on it whether you like it or not. And as you said when you started off, if you've got, you know, brain in your head, you've got mental health. So, you know, so trying to pretend that there's some category of people, some group of people who are somehow immune, it is quite frankly bizarre. So it's a bizarre concept that we would think that some people are perfectly mentally healthy all of the time. I mean, that's quite a bizarre way of, we wouldn't think that about physical health. We wouldn't say this is a superhuman who's perfectly physically healthy all of the time. I mean, that would just be, everybody would go, nah, because they can't be.
Yeah.
They can't be.
Mm-hmm.
So when we start to think about mental health in the same way, and we apply the same parameters, it's obvious. You know, it's obvious that and I think if you start to apply those types, you start to apply a different way of thinking about mental health, but it's obvious that just like physical health, you know, there will be better times and worse times.
Yeah.
So once we can get our heads around that, we can, you know, and some people's physical health might be more compromised for longer than others, and you know, that's okay too. And, you know, some people's mental health might be more compromised than others for longer periods of time. And obviously, physical health, we get medication, we get treatment, we get looked after, and mental health, it should be no different.
Good. Thank you. Well
Is
said.
it?
Well said.
Good.
No, good. What a response. Good.
Good.
I
Awesome.
mean, my two follow-ups are, Continuum sounds like a new medication that you're offering.
Continuum.
You need to take Continuum. It's really important. And also, if it's taking that long to light your fire, just get a fucking electric heater, Vic. You know, come on, just get some. Okay.
No, it goes against. Like, this is an old stone cottage. It deserves to have smoke coming out of the chimney.
It's fine.
I haven't worked my fingers to the bone to stick an electric heater.
Okay.
And like, what are you trying to do here?
No. I'm just. But anyway, I really thank you for your time and your honesty. I'm sorry we had to end on that quite vicious note. Vikki Quartermaine, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Jack.
You are a mental case, 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 you are mental, you are a mental case, 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 you are mental, possibly.